Yo, what's poppin' everyone? Welcome back to the Shuffle Squad. Zach Lesage here. Today we're going to be going over another iteration of our top 10 best decks, the top 10 best decks in our Temporal Forces format, heading into Indianapolis Regionals. I spent the morning basically ranking these decks, seeing where they stand, and seeing the results over the past weekend. I'm pretty sure this top 10 list is accurate. There are a couple decks that can kind of get those bottom spots, and just so you know, I was thinking about adding a Spathra on there, Dialga. There's a handful of other things that we may or may not see, control variants, but what's our decks in our top 10? You're gonna have to watch this video to find out. Let us know in the comments which decks you think are in the top 10. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's jump into our number 10 pick. Jumping into that number 10 spots and two hands up in the air, we got Turbo Iron Hands EX. Now, Iron Hands EX has not necessarily had a great showing since EUIC, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a deck that's not to be respected. Sure, it does not have a great Charizard matchup, and it can lose to some other decks, such as Lost Zone Tina. If we look at the top 5, there's a reason why this deck's down at the top 10. However, there are a lot of decks out there, such as the Moon to Dunsparce, Lugia, Ancient Box, that this deck can grasp onto and really have a decent run. So when decks are not really expected, like the Turbo Iron Hands, sure, we all should know what a deck list certainly looks like if we're playing the game at a super competitive level. If not, this video is going to provide you with that deck list that it should look like. That doesn't mean that you're not going to want to sit across here and not face this. So it is one of those things. Sure, loses to Zard, beats other decks, could be pretty cool. We do have a pinned comment in this video, so check that out with all the copy and pastable versions of these lists. You can get that on mobile, on PC, whatever, and you can copy and paste it right into live. If you need any cards for them, check out our sponsors at Kayfabe Cards, or you could check out PTCG Store to get some code cards if you want to craft this deck online. Let's see what we've got going on for our number 9. If you haven't already, put your best guesses for the top 10. We do get back to all comments on our channel. Jumping into our 9 pick is Giratina. Now, Giratina saw a decent bit of success at Orlando. However, I do feel like the metagame has shifted in a way where there are maybe a little bit more Chen-pao. Zards have become a little bit better, and as decks become better in the format, you'll see some of the counters, they aren't as efficient anymore. They aren't as potent anymore, right? We discover the strategies around these decks, and we understand the list, so we have tried and true gameplay over and over to beat this deck with Charizard, and Chien-pao is already a tough matchup, and Moon to Dunsparce is a tough matchup, and like Giratina is like similar to Turbo Iron Hands, just slightly better position in this format. Is it a bad deck? No. Could you go on a run with it? Yes. But it's incredibly basic, and you will find your opponent typically knowing your game plan. Considering Giratina has been a deck since the very beginning, since Lost Origin came out, so we're well over a year and a half of knowing what this deck does. Will it see success? I'm sure we'll probably see at least one in the top 16. Could it be you? We'll have to find out. Do you have another ARC variant that you might want to try? Let us know. Chilling at number 8 is Ancient Box, the deck that Jake Ewert was able to come second place with at Orlando Regionals. So this deck has kind of dropped a lot from last week, and I think a lot of it has to do with the way that the metagame has shaped up. Charizard is at an all-time high. Charizard typically beats this deck. It's not like it's an impossible matchup to beat. However, it is one of those things where it is slightly unfavored for this deck. And when you're a deck that's slightly unfavored against the best deck in formats, like Turbo Iron Hands or this deck, you're going to be pretty low on this list because you might run into Charizard 3-4 times day one. I wouldn't be surprised if that was majority of people's day. Charizard could reach 30% of the field at Indianapolis Regionals. It's probably going to be minimum 20, but we'll have to see how it goes. I think this deck has some other fantastic matchups, such as Chen-pao, and there's a few other decks where this deck can just kind of run through because they are not well prepared to take out single prize card Pokemon. However, this deck is falling off a little bit. Again, people understand how this deck works. They're understanding strategies against it. it is still a very good pick, and I think any of the decks within this top 10 could reasonably win the regionals. You just probably want to choose a deck that's going to beat Charizard more often than not. Lost Zoning its way to number 7 is Lost Zone Toolbox. Now, Lost Zone Toolbox is kind of in an odd place in this format, because I feel like where other decks have a decent positioning in the metagame or have some tough matchups, I don't know if this deck has good matchups nor does it have bad matchup. It kind of just exists. And that's where it's just like, okay, you could play this against Chen Pao, you could beat Chen Pao, or Chen Pao could beat you. And maybe that's appealing, but I feel like a lot of the times it's like you're at the mercy of Colress or just excellently playing. Lost Zone box decks are typically high reward, but they're a little bit high risk as well. So if you ever make a mistake, you're probably going to be incredibly punished by it, by your opponent being able to just run you over. If you're not really making mistakes, then the Lost Zone box deck should probably be a little bit more appealing. Flower selecting is kind of one of those Pokemon TCG lies in a way, or at least I like to joke around and say, because we're attempting to play the game. So even if you're dead drawing, you're able to draw in some extra cards, lost on some cards. You're playing towards at least some kind of a win con. However, it can get dangerously bad when you're stuck between Roaring Moon and Iron Hands when you need both for a matchup or anything like that. Tech this deck according to the metagame. However, I think most of the tech should be kind of accurate. Hoopa might have fallen out of favor towards some other decks, or some other techs, I should say, but we'll have to see how the metagame turns up at Indy. I think that this is a fine list if you're looking to play anything. Again, the lists are all available in the pinned comment, so feel free to copy and paste, try them out, especially at some of our tournaments like the late night events. Sliding its way into number 6 is one of the more interesting decks on this list, or at least probably my favorite deck in Standard right now, Moon the Dunsparce. A lot of people have been playing this deck because I think Dunsparce is a really fun card to play, and it's also really weird to play in real life. You say you're announcing the ability, you draw the 3 cards, then you shuffle it back, and you're like, wait, am I going to go back in with Artisan or Nest Ball? Okay, I'm going to Nest Ball, grab back a Dunsparce, then I'm going to shuffle, then I'm going to use Dunsparce again. A lot of the times I feel like we're shuffling, then we draw. Cards like Iono, if you search for it through quick search. Anyways, I feel like this deck is well positioned in our format because we can take on some of the top decks. It has slightly unfavorable matchups against like Charizard, but it can be kind of close because a lot of people don't necessarily understand how this deck operates. You're kind of a 2 prize card deck concealing yourself as a single prize card deck, and you have opportunities to knock out pretty much anything in format. So it's relatively cool, it's relatively aggressive. When it sets up, it sets up. I did have an Iron Lee's version last week. I think I'm going to go with this version because Iron Lee's version was unable to set up as often as I'd like it to. I think it's really cool, and feel free to check out that video from last week as well. But right now, I think this is the version of Moon to Dunsparce that most people are going to be playing at Indy. And I think this is probably the correct choice to be playing at Indy. I've always thought about cutting more Ancient Booster Energy Capsules, but that's something that's on a I need to test basis. And with the amount of time that I have left for Indy, I'm not sure if we're going to get there. Flying high all the way up to the top is Lugia VSTAR. Now, this is a deck that took me to a 19th place finish out of 2,400 players in Orlando Regionals. And I think the deck is still very well positioned because we're kind of getting into the first deck that has a solid matchup against Charizard, unfavorable matchup against Chen Pao, but it's possible, favorable matchup against Tina, and then we beat a lot of the other decks on this list. A lot of the decks on this list are trying to dodge other decks on this list, and there's not too many decks that are going to be like, yeah, I'm cool playing against pretty much everything, unless you're a Lost in Box deck. But in that case, there's really not a lot of freebie matchups, whereas if I play this against an Arceus deck or something else, we'll have to see how it plays out. I think that Lugia, if we can get past some of the consistency issues or just playing it properly to get past some ugly starts, this deck is quite possibly one of the better picks that you could have for Indianapolis Regionals. And if it's one of those decks that you've been thinking about playing, by all means, it's probably a good play. You just got to get past when to use Read the Wind, when to properly play your supporters, and sequence this deck properly. It's a little bit more difficult to play a deck like this perfectly than you think, and I think that's really where the stigma lies with Lugia being an easy to play deck or an inconsistent mess. A lot of people just aren't really giving it the time it needs, and it did feel quite good to play at Orlando Regionals. Sliding its way into number 4 is one of the surprise decks from Orlando Regionals, Gardevoir EX. Now, it's weird to say Gardevoir EX is a surprise deck when in their previous pre-rotation formats, Gardevoir was arguably the best deck in the format. However, it kind of quickly dropped off as we lost the Chilling Reign Gardevoir. Now, this deck is really like sneaky in a lot of ways, because not a lot of people know how to play against the Drifloon, the Screamtail, the Mimikyu, the Fluttermane, even the Klefki. And it has some decent matchups. I think as Charizard players learn to play against this deck will find itself kind of crawling down the list. So we'll have to see if players are going to bring this deck to Indie Regionals or to other events happening this weekend. But for right now, I think that Gardevoir still has that surprise factor. It's a relatively high skill deck to play. And of course, that's going to be a very good combination if you play it correctly and you hit some decent matchups. Still not a perfect deck by any means, like any other deck on this list. Well, maybe except one deck that might be at the very top, but we'll get on that in a second. Gardevoir seems like a well-positioned deck heading into the format, at least for the foreseeable future. If you're a Gardevoir fan, stand up, play your deck, and see how it goes. Blastoise Tina has long been one of the more successful decks in our format, pre-rotation, post-rotation, and when you have players like Azul, Caleb Gedimer, and Grant Manley playing this to both EUIC and Orlando, you know there's got to be something there, right? I think this is, again, one of the only decks on this list that should have a favorable Charizard matchup, or at least has lines of plays where it can be. One thing that I've done is I cut the Spiritomb from the list. As Spiritomb is becoming a little bit less successful, players are relying on Cleffa a little bit more in their Charizard decks, and I don't really find that Spiritomb is doing much against other decks. Sableye can be quite good as players are cutting Jirachi in and out of their decks. We'll have to see how it continuously plays out in this format, but I did take this to a recent League Cup top 8 out of like 60 or so players, and that was quite a solid finish for me, finding success with this deck. So I'm a huge fan of it. I do mourn the loss of Path to the Peak, but all the tools are there, and if you play this deck correctly, similar to the Lost Zone box deck, you could find yourself in day 2 seeing success. You're gonna have to play your heart out for a lot of matchups, and I think if you're debating between any Lost Zone box variant, I would probably be playing Tina, because that's the one that's proven itself time and time again that it is the most successful Lost Zone box deck, at least in our more recent standard formats. Cooling down the rest of the metagame at number 2 is Chen Pao EX. Now, Chen Pao EX has been on a bit of a run, making top 4 at Orlando Regionals with Regan Retzloff and a handful of other players seeing a lot of success with a similar list. I've taken that list, cut off a singular copy of Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking, and added in a boss's orders to give myself some more opportunities against some control decks, and to just be a little bit more aggressive. This deck is really interesting because some players say this beats Charizard, other players say that it doesn't beat Charizard, but with the way that Charizard lists are currently built, I feel like they have a slight disadvantage against Chen Pao, especially if Chen Pao is played correctly. We'll have to see how this plays out at Indie Regionals, because there's one side of Charizard that is playing Eerie, De-Evolution, and maybe even Regieleki. Then there's the other side that's like the Tord versions that are like, hey, we've seen a lot more success. We beat Control, I think, and we have Turos and stuff like that. Chen Pao probably wants to play against the Tord versions if I ever had any kind of thoughts on that. But being an aggressive deck that can accelerate a bunch of energies, knock out anything, draw extra prize cards is never going to be bad. That's why this deck being a well-rounded version, or at least like a runner-up to what our number 1 deck is going to be. If you haven't guessed it by now, let us know in the comments. Chen Pao seems incredibly well positioned in this tournament. Jumping into our number 1 pick, Charizard EX. Now, this deck has been an absolute terror to our standard format, because I feel like it's won like every single tournament we've had, from Tord at EUIC all the way to Sao Paulo Regionals, all the way to Orlando Regionals. Is this deck going to continuously see the success it's going to see? Yeah, I think every top player thinks that they could play this deck better than the other top players. And it's really just more of like a metagame of all the top players playing the best deck. Sure, someone's going to win. And whether it's going to be Azul, Tord, one of the Gamilla Bros, Cal Connor, like, someone's going to win if they play Charizard. And I could list off 100 other names. I think we're going to see an Indie Regional champion playing Charizard. If not, someone's going to be playing a deck that really counters Charizard. And maybe it's Control, maybe it's a Grass deck. We'll have to find out. But right now, I believe this is currently one of the best lists for the best deck in format. So if you haven't given it a try, give it a try. Pick up the cards for this deck. every single player right now, if you want to be playing the game at a super competitive level, should have Charizard pre-built, tossed in their bag for any tournament, because there's never really a wrong time to be playing this deck. Sure, might be some fields that are very grass heavy, control heavy, counter heavy. Maybe don't play Charizard those days. If you're going into a blind League Cup, this is a deck that you should be trying, because it's the majority of the deck that you are going to face. So that being said, Charizard's on top. Did I surprise anyone? We'll have to figure things out, but let me close things out. And that's what we got going on for our video today. Charizard EX is on top, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have an easy ride to winning Indianapolis Regionals. Sure, it's probably the deck that has the power strength that's going to get there. Sure, it might actually end up winning yet another Regionals in this format, but that doesn't mean that you can't counter it at all. So I think we're going to see some Iron Leafs being played, some Star Requiem's being played, some Eries being played, some Devos, some Controls, grass types like Espathra, other unique decks trying to beat this deck. Will they get there? I'm not sure. Hey, Willow. Gotta always say hi to the dogs, you know what I'm saying? That being said, I hope that you enjoyed watching this video. If there's anything I can do to help you before your next event, I'm currently all the way booked up for Indy, but I come back on Monday. I'd love to help you, so hit me up for some coaching at metafy.gg. I've been hosting some master courses, so stay tuned for my socials on X and Facebook to see if I'm hosting any other master classes. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. We might have already hit 20,000 subs. Maybe not. Maybe we're close. Got to record these a little bit in advance when it comes to these traveling weeks. So if we hit it, let's go. If not, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel. I hope you enjoyed everything. Peace out and have a great one. Want to support the Shuffle Squad? Be sure to check out all of our sponsors in the description to pick up Pokemon TCG singles, sealed, and PTCG live codes. You made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching this entire video from the Shuffle Squad. Honestly, from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate each and every person that supports our content, watches what we have going on every single day, every single week, even from time to time, and continuously allows us to have a forum to project our creative content towards the Pokemon TCG community. So if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm. That being said, we'll catch you with our next video. Thanks again. Take it easy.